Okay, welcome. Episode 11 of the exercise application assignment. So basically, Wednesday and Friday we didn't have class. Wednesday was an exam last week. It's falling. Hold up. Let me fix my little tripod. Okay, that's better, I think. So we didn't cover any new content, and I'd already gone through the content, and I was tired of repeating myself over and over. So now we have some new content. We're in chapter 5. We're talking about hormones and exercise related responses to hormones. Let's start with what I actually did today. Today's Tuesday. I meant to film this video yesterday, but whatever. This is episode 11. So let's run through it. The workout, I started out with some calves. I did both standing calf raise and leg press calf raises. And then I did leg press. I did 4 sets of leg press actually. I'm pumping the volume back up just a little bit. What I found, I talked to you, Dr. Hyde, about, volume amounts and stuff like that. And what I've been finding is that, my little volume experiment, really it could have just done with, I think the way I increased volume was wrong. I kind of just increased volume across the board evenly. But really, you focusing on increasing volumes for exercises which are not as systemically fatiguing. So I was increasing both the volume of leg presses and squats equally, which are both very taxing exercises, and increasing stuff like stiff-legged deadlifts and seated hamstring curls equally, which in hindsight was not very smart, but that probably contributed to my greater amounts of fatigue. So now I'm trying to increase the volume on exercises which have a greater stimulus to fatigue ratio. So if I'm going to increase volumes, something on a leg press, I'll leg press more often than I squat to avoid the fatigue associated with loading my spine and stuff like that. So I did 4 sets of leg press, and then I did seated hamstring curls. Then I did my stiff-legged RDLs, and that felt pretty good. I kind of decreased the weight on a little bit on those just so I could try and get a better stretch. And I'm still working on getting an absolutely full stretch, but I'm much better than I was. Felt super good. And then I did Smith machine sissy squats, which I'm liking because I maxed out the leg extension machine like at the end of my workout. So after doing all of my quad work, I go to the leg extension machine and have it maxed out for 20 reps. And I mean, I'm not just like throwing it around. I'm going. Psh, psh, psh. So I mean, it's whatever. Let's see, what else is there? I could have added some intensity techniques on the leg press, but you know what, like doing bodyweight squats right after completing my last set of leg press, or maybe even the last 2 sets. But I didn't really think about that at the time. I kind of just slipped my mind, but all sets were taken to failure. And then what else did I do? I did the adductor machine for the inner thigh. The adductors, and I'm trying to get that sartorius to pop a little bit more, which is trained indirectly through squatting and leg pressing type movements, and also kind of trained through the adductor machine. That's just not a good way to target it, but I want a sartorius that pokes out a lot. You know what I'm saying? I feel like that's very aesthetic. So let's talk about hormonal signaling. So what I just read through, the notes I'm taking right now, talking about how, let's cover, what do we cover in class? What we covered in class is mainly just how hormones communicate, receptor type stuff, and that's pretty general. You have receptors on a cell. Cells can be saturated, text message type deal. You send a text message, it has a specific message, send an input to a person, let's say, they're the receptor. And the length with which they could read that message, is important. They have to be free. Hormones have to be free. There's not a good analogy for everything. I mean, looking through just what I have from what we covered in lecture, this is still fresh information, so I get to look at my notes. Bite me. I'm just gonna cover what we covered in lecture because we're gonna get to stuff later, and then I don't want to mess up. So we covered kind of the basics of neuroendocrinology. You have water-soluble and lipid-soluble proteins, which I knew. Steroids. are your fat-soluble ones. They pass through the cell membrane very easily. They have to be bound to a transport protein in the blood, though. It increases their half-life. Amino type proteins, aminopeptide and protein type hormones don't need a protein to move through the blood, but they only bind to the outside of the cell. Steroids go inside the cell. Hormone secretion, was it plasma concentration, is part of how effective a hormone is. So the plasma concentration and the number of active receptors. So you get your secretion rate, your hormonal excretion rate, transport protein quantity, and changes in plasma volume. If you have too many protein transporters, you're not going to have enough of the hormone in its active form, so it can't exert its effect. Transport protein's capacity, it's the maximum quantity of hormone that can bind to a transport protein, and the affinity, the chemical tendency of transport protein to bind to a hormone. An increase in capacity, affinity, or quantity reduces the amount of the free hormone and its effect on tissue. Yeah. How do I relate this to training? Without getting into too much of the kind of later on stuff, there's a hormonal response to training. Each hormone in our body does respond to training. Most of the hormones they do respond to training to an extent. And what Professor Hyde, what you told me, is that heavyweights tend to have more of our gross hormonal response on the body. So if we're talking about, you hear this a lot, training legs, it tends to increase your testosterone because you're exposing yourself to heavier loads. So it's important to do your heavy squats, your heavy leg presses, because that's the most load you can put on your tissue. So that's kind of maxing out your hormonal. But the lighter stuff, the stuff that really burns, your metabolite type training, also has a signal for hypertrophy. So if we're talking about this, the whole idea of saturation, you want to create a stimulus. You want to have a hormonal release that is adaptive, in that there's no point in stimulating your muscles past the point of saturation. So if you create an adaptive hormonal response, there's no point in having extra. You don't want overspill, because all that's going to do is dig into your recovery capacity. So you're often, during training, you're walking this fine line of stimulating growth without overexerting yourself, in that you can't recover from session to session. So that brings me back to stimulus fatigue ratio, a concept I'm familiar with and I had known with my previous experiment over a couple of months regarding my training volume. But it's just you want, the fatigue is neural for the most part. You might get sore, but your ability to produce a forceful contraction, your nervous system needs time to recuperate, especially when you train legs. That's where I have the most trouble. Is I can pound my legs pretty hard, and I love squatting. I absolutely love squatting, and I think that's why my training went the kind of direction that it did, where I was just squatting too much. And it was the Smith machine squat, so I figured, it's more stable, so it's not really fatiguing myself as much, which is true. You're providing a higher quality stimulus to the quadriceps, and that hormonal response and the metabolite response, or whatever, it's going to be better. The dealio is, though, you're still loading your spine. It's a heavy movement that's on your spine. So your nervous capacity to recuperate is very limited, and pumping up volumes there is not the way to go if you're talking about pure hypertrophy. Or maybe I just did it too quickly, but I don't think I did it too quickly. I took things very slow. So there is probably some sort of recovery capacity that I have at the current moment. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts. There's not too much to relate from what we covered in lecture. It's more just once we start talking about some more of the adaptations to exercise with your hormones in lecture, then I'll cover that. I've covered it already in my notes, but I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to end up like how I did last unit where I felt like I was saying the same things over and over. But that'll do it for this episode, just really quick. Alrighty.